All right. We're back. So, as I said before, every time we open up this book, we're going to say this prayer. God, take away everything I think I know about this book, about this process, and about you, God, so that I can have an experience with you. Woo! Okay. Did the contents, did the preface. Moving on to the forward to the first edition. This is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. And then it says we. Boom, that's a giant we, right? Okay, cool. So there's 3 reasons for this fantastic we. The first is that it's the first letter, the first word, the first paragraph, the first forward. And for aesthetic reasons, well, it looks mighty damn pretty. Second reason is that it's a common misconception that Bill Wilson wrote this book on his own. This book is not written by Bill Wilson. It is written by the collective conscience of 100 people who had recovered from alcoholism, which means that it's a lot harder to argue this book because it's not the opinion of a man. It's the opinion or the collective conscience of a group of people who this shit was working for, right? We're not talking about no 12 and 12 right now. We're talking about the original message. And last but not least, it's unity, right? So what that means is that we need each other. So if the program works based on us blessing as many people as we possibly can, helping each other, taking other people through the book, then we need each other. Because without that, we don't have a way to connect to God, because that's how we treat our spirit, right? So what does that mean? That means that we need to try to work on the parts of us that alienate others from our lives, right? So anything that's divisive is not something that we want to be a part of, all right? Obviously, in the American temperature today, racism, not cool. We're not about that life, all right? We're not cool about gossip. We're not cool about hating. We're not cool about talking shit about people. We're not cool about, making people feeling excluded from things, judging other people, comparing ourselves to other people. You can go on a global standpoint and be like, borders are dumb, countries are dumb, patriotism is dumb, nationalism is dumb. Basically anything that separates us from another human being is dumb. It's about unity. How different are we from each other? Not very. So, granted, this is a big concept. You don't have to buy into all of it, but again, we is about unity, all right? Don't talk shit about each other. Okay, so we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And we're going to circle awkwardly, seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I still haven't figured out how to do it where it's like one cool circle, but anyway. So, recovered versus recovering, right? That's our big argument in Alcoholics Anonymous these days, or one of them. So some people say you're never recovered, you're always recovering, and the book is saying you've recovered, right? So I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. First of all, this hopeless state of mind and body is just seeming. It's obviously not hopeless. One of the things we learn as sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any Anonymous is that if you are still breathing, there is still hope. Always, okay? But hopeless state of mind, right? So that is the place where I am just constantly in the lie. I'm believing constantly that I do not have the physical allergy, and the hopeless state of body would be being trapped in active addiction, trapped in the phenomenon of craving, just can't stop, won't stop, right? So I've recovered from that. The reason I've recovered from that is that I have not put a drink or a drug in my body in over 20 years. So I am not triggering that physical allergy, and I am in the book on the daily. So my mind is never telling me, hey, Michaelis, you can go get high. This doesn't happen, right? So I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. That is not a part of my life today. To show other alcoholics precisely, we're going to circle precisely how we have recovered. Circle recovered is the main purpose of this book. Boom. Precisely. What that means is that this isn't smorgasbord life, right? Like, I can't walk down the aisle and say, like, I want to have the rice pudding and I want to have the jello, but the chocolate cake's not for me. Who would even make that decision? Everyone likes chocolate. Not everyone likes chocolate cake. I forget. This is going all over the place. But anyway, the point is this, right? We have to do what's in this book because it's going to show us exactly what to do to recover. And that's the main purpose of this book. So it's funny because I had to ask myself, because I had 10 years of sobriety before someone actually took the time to take me through this book line by line. And I wondered, how is that possible? If in the first paragraph, in the first forward, it says it's going to show me exactly how to recover, and that is the main purpose of this book, how is it that I've gone 10 years of sobriety without someone taking me through it? That is absolutely insane. We've got some lazy sponsorship out there in the world. All right, so it says, for them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. Okay? This is all we're going to need to recover from alcoholism. Okay? That doesn't mean that therapy doesn't help with outside issue stuff, with traumas, all the good stuff. But when we're talking about alcoholism and addiction, this is the way. Now, my experience is that before I ever got sober, I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed with depression. I'm sure if I was born 10 years later, I would have been diagnosed with bipolar, but it wasn't quite the fad trend yet. So this book and this process has actually helped me recover from those things. That's been my experience. I'm not on any medication for any of that stuff. I'm not knocking medication at all. If you need it, take it, do your thing. But my personal experience is that it's been cool for me, right? So it says, we think this account of our experience will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. So this is also why I'm making this for the non-alcoholic, because if you're someone who is a moderate or temperate drinker and you're dating an alcoholic and you have no idea like what's going on in their brain, or once they get sober, you have no idea like what their life is going to look like and why they've got these weird people hanging out at your house, or why they're going to these meetings at all hours of the night, or why they're picking up the phone and taking phone calls from strangers and all this stuff like that. This is going to explain why we do that, you know, why we go to meetings, why we pick up the phone, why we go and reach out to people. So this is going to help you understand that, understand the solution, understand the problem. It says, many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And we're going to circle that, right? So, we are sick people. That doesn't make us devoid of taking responsibility for our sickness once we have the solution. But when I was out there drinking and using and I had no solution for my life, and the truth is that I could not help the things that I was doing back then, you know? But once I took away the drugs and the alcohol, there was definitely some things that I could help, you know? And so it's really about not holding people accountable, but having some compassion for, you know, people where they're at. It says, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. And we're going to highlight that entire paragraph. So this way of living does have advantages for all. It allows us to be more present. It allows us to be kind and loving to other people, which allows us to be kind and loving to ourselves. It allows us to live a life that's based on faith, you know? And I'm not talking about religious faith, but based in the faith that we're okay and everything is going to be okay. And if we sow into that kind of thinking, then it makes our current actions less erratic, right? Because we're walking in this earth with a bit more stability. It also puts in perspective the importance of that connection over the importance of, you know, finances, the importance of our material gains, the importance of relationships, stuff like that, stuff that we already discussed, right? So that we can also lead a more stable life. So that is that first paragraph. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals. which may result from the publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupation in such an event. Okay? So, this is the first time that we are talking about anonymity in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, so it's important that we talk about the first reason for anonymity. Okay? And they're going to give us 3, and this is the first one. The first one is this. What they're saying is that if I was born back in, the 1910, 1915, right? And I'm from California, and I go on a business trip, and I fly to Akron, Ohio on this business trip, right? Or New York. And I am an alcoholic, and I wind up meeting one of these dudes, right? And I get so sort of like enthralled in their message that I extend my business trip. They take me through the steps. I go back to California. I go back to my family. I go back to my job. And there I am, the only person in the world, east or west of Akron, Ohio, or New York, who's recovered from alcoholism, right? So if I go around and I say, hi, my name is Michaelis Jacoby, and I can help everybody stay sober. I have a message of recovery. Then what would happen is that there would be way too many people that would be coming to me asking me for help, right? So either I would sell out the people that needed help, or I'd sell out my business or my family trying to help all those people. But either way, I'd be spread too thin, okay? So what this is saying here is that basically we needed to stay anonymous in the beginning so that we could grow the fellowship from within. So there was enough people who had enough time sober that could help all the people that were in need. It's that simple. Now, is that relevant today? No. The reason why it's not relevant today is because there are meetings all over the world. There's treatment centers all over the world. There's sober livings all over the world. There's meetings online. 12-step is permeated society completely. So we don't really have to worry about not having enough people to help all the people in need or in want, right? But I also want to point out is that when you go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, you hear a very different reason for why people want to stay anonymous. Usually it's because they don't want people to know. They're afraid of what it's going to look like to their friends. They're afraid it's going to mess up with their job. They're afraid of judgments from other people and blah, 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 right? But I want to point out that the principle behind what they're talking about here is not fear, right? What they're talking about here is how can we better be of service? How can we maximize service to others, right? Service to our families and service to the alcoholic or drug addict, right? I want to say that if it has to do with fear, it doesn't have to do with this program, right? Fear will never be the solution for this program. So that whole thing that we hear in the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous or any anonymous, that's not where we want to try to be living, right? We don't want to be living in fear. If we have a relationship with a God that loves us, wants the best for us, and takes care of us no matter what, then what do we have to be afraid of? Okay? So if you hear fear as the foundation of a reasoning or explanation to do something, that's probably not the path that you want to take for yourself. It then says, we would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation, and I underline avocation. So an avocation is an activity taken up in addition to one's regular work or profession. Now they use this word for a specific reason, and the reason is this. Going to 6 meetings a day and living like a bum, right? But being able to recite the book backwards and forwards is not what Alcoholics Anonymous is about. Alcoholics Anonymous is about being a productive member of society, right? So yeah, we do this work in addition to our regular work or profession. So what that means is that we should have work. We should have a profession. We should be contributing to the world. And I'll go so far as to say this. Alcoholics Anonymous is about following your dreams, right? If you have dreams and if you have passions, it's your responsibility as an example of Alcoholics Anonymous to go after it. Live fearlessly. Do whatever it is that you want to do that makes you happy. That is the goal of this whole process. Don't settle for anything less. You can do anything, right? That is the whole point of gaining access to the power of God is being able to do whatever you want fearlessly in this lifetime. Go for it. Go get him, kid. All right. Next reason, it says, when writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, so personal name, what's that? That's our last name. Now, the reason for that is that back in the day, your last name dictated your socioeconomic class, you know, and some of the founding members of Alcoholics Anonymous were rich, right? They were really rich, and their last names let other people know how rich they really were. So they wanted to basically even the playing field. So when we walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any Anonymous, we are all on the same level, right? No one is better or less than. Again, we're talking about that we thing. We're all in the same boat, right? Now, is that relevant today? Of course, it's relevant to all be on the same level, but there's, you know, in terms of our last name dictating our socioeconomic class, there's so many people in 12-step meetings these days that it's not that much of an issue, right? Finally, very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped, right? So this is somewhat relevant today in the sense that a lot of times the press will film a celebrity coming in and out of a meeting, right? And, you know, let's say we've got Sally Jo Hamilton in Ohio, right? And she's basically, you know, watching TMZ every day, and her brother's an alcoholic, right? And she's seeing like this celebrity and that celebrity going in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and basically she's seeing them relapse 6 months later. So do you think that she's going to send her brother to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous to get help? Probably not, because she doesn't think it works, right? Now, are the press and the media, are they actually taking the time to explain the program of Alcoholics Anonymous or going through the book, or are they just trying to sell stories? So basically, in that sense, that is true, right? So they're being elevated to some sort of level of being an example of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if they fail or they relapse, then it's not a good look. So it says we are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking, and we're going to highlight honest. Now, they took the word honest out of the traditions because it's pretty subjective, right? And it scared a lot of people away. And it's easy for a alcoholic or drug addict to start head tripping on themselves and be like, well, is my desire honest? Maybe I really don't belong here. You know what I mean? So we just keep it to a desire to stop drinking. We're not allied with any particular faith or sect or denomination, so we're not connected to any sort of religion, nor do we oppose anyone. But we also don't oppose anyone. That's awesome. Because of that, we simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. That is our main purpose, to be helpful to those who are afflicted. It says, we shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book. Then it says, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We're going to underline that. Why do you think we want to hear from the people who are working with other people? Because they're actually working it, which means that if you are not working with other people, you're not working it, okay? So, work with other people. You don't go to the car dealership and buy a car without test driving it. You want to see if it works by actually doing the deal, right? So, before you make judgments on whether or not this program works, try actually working it the way that it was intended, which means like actually going through this entire process and simultaneously taking other people through the process while you're doing it, right? So it says, we should like to be helpful in such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Sincerely, Alcoholics Anonymous. All right, now we have something written here. And to me, it's one of the deepest things I've ever written or heard in my entire life, and I'm really grateful it was passed on to me. So this is what it says. If I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, my spirit will be joyful at all times. Life is a condition manifesting growth, spiritual growth, moral growth, intellectual growth, and physical growth. The steps will give me deep spiritual qualities. If I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, my spirit will be joyful at all times. Life is a condition manifesting growth, spiritual growth, moral growth, intellectual growth, and physical growth. The steps will give me deep spiritual qualities. Now, last time for the cheap seats. If I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, my spirit will be joyful at all times. Life is a condition manifesting growth, spiritual growth, moral growth, intellectual growth, and physical growth. The steps will give me deep spiritual qualities. So let's break this down. If I really understand who I am, I need to understand what I'm not, right? And it's really easy to get caught up in thinking I'm something that I'm not, or to get attached to the human roles that I play in this human experience, right? So whether being a partner in a relationship, a father to a child, a DJ, a person with this amount of money in the bank, a person that stays in this rate hotel, the person that has, this material thing or that material thing. These things that we, in our human experience allow us to define us, right? So I need to be willing to let that go. I'm not saying like go sell your yacht, but I'm saying like let go of that being your defining things in your life, right? And so what I really need to understand is that I am the light of God, okay? Now, what does it mean to be the light of God? That means that I have a purpose on this earth. My purpose is to shine that light out onto every single person and every single situation that presents itself to me in every single moment. And what that means is to be a blessing, right? To bless every single person and every situation that presents itself to me in the moment, okay? So it says that if I understand that, then my spirit will be joyful. Sorry, I gotta plug this shit in. My spirit will be joyful at all times, right? It's only when I get caught up in these human definitions that my spirit is not joyful. But if I am constantly focused on being the blessing in every moment, and just the moment that's in front of me, then my spirit will be joyful at all times. And that's really where I get to be launched into the fourth dimension, which we'll talk again later. The fourth dimension is when space meets time, which means it's the actual present moment. It's the moment that the only thing that's actually real in front of us, right? Because everything outside of the present moment is complete fantasy and fiction. So if I can just stay in the moment through constantly thinking in my brain, how can I bless this moment? Then yeah, I'm going to be joyful at all times because I'm not going to be thinking about the future. I'm not going to be, sitting in shame or regret about the past. I'm just going to be helping the moment. And it feels good. Every time I walk away from a situation that I've been helpful and kind and loving, I feel good. So, if I really understand who I am, I, the light of God, my spirit will be joyful at all times. So I also understand if I'm the light of God and every single person that I read this with is also the light of God, then I can safely assume that everything around me is the light of God, okay? I'm going to save the other information for later, but there's stuff that gets a little more detailed about that in step 2, and then even more detailed in step 11, where it really describes what I'm talking about. It describes what God's will is, and we'll get into all that as we get there. So I'm going to stop that there. So it says life is a condition manifesting growth. So the natural flow of life is growth, right? We start as sperm and egg in mama's belly, and all of a sudden we grow up and we're these, big hairy people, right? So natural flow is growth. So it's talking about spiritual growth. How do I grow spiritually? Well, we've been talking about it. The way I grow spiritually, the way I perfect and enlarge my spiritual life is through the constant thought of others and how I may help their needs. It's that simple. Blessing as many people in as many situations as I possibly can. That is how I grow spiritually. That is how I connect to God. That is how I gain the access to the power of God from which I can live by, right? Moral growth. Moral growth is going to happen through the step process, right? So step 4, we're going to figure out the parts of us that aren't working for us so that we can let them go. We're going to figure out the parts of us that are working for us so we can keep them. And we're going to figure out what our ideals are so that we can strive for them. Step 5, we're going to read that to somebody else because we can't really trust ourselves to give us an honest self-appraisal. We need help from others, right? Because our mode of operatum is basically to lie to ourselves. So we need an outside, unbiased perspective to help us see a deeper truth, right? Then what we do is we figure out what's not working for us. We become ready to ask the universe to remove that stuff. And then we just say like, yo, universe, get rid of this, please, right? So that's how we help out with the morals. But then we got to clean up the wreckage of our past, right? So we make a list of all the people we've harmed, and then we actually go out and we repair our past. And what that helps us doing is that it helps us, A, relieve ourselves of a lot of baggage, and it helps us better live in the present. Because most times in our lives when we are overacting to life, let's say we get cut off in our cars on the freeway, right? Now, if we start going crazy and getting so upset, that's not a normal reaction, right? And usually why we get so upset is that how dare that person disrespect me? Don't they know who I am? Why are you getting in my way? It's so dangerous, blah, 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 this and that. You know, and that's coming from like us not feeling enough when our father didn't say hi to us when we wanted him to when we were a kid, you know? So if we get to repair all these sort of traumas from our past, then we get to be free to react sanely in the moment, right? So that's how we change our moral growth. Step 10, of course, is to continue that process that I just described. Intellectual growth. If we want to grow in an area in our life, we need to feed our minds, right? So for me, like taking people through the book, I really wanted to study the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? But I also wanted to study supplemental literature to it. So, you know, I read Lois's biography. I read Not God. I read, you know, the book on Ebby Thatcher. I read a bunch of different books to sort of, you know, get as much knowledge as I possibly could to be able to better explain this book to other people and to make it like come to life and make it interesting, you know? As a music producer, I needed to, you know, study Ableton. As a DJ, I need to study, you know, DJ Angelo's scratch videos, like whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever we need to do, if we're passionate about something, feed our minds, do whatever you can to continue to learn and grow. And physical growth. This is probably the slowest thing for me, but it's really important. We've been given these temples to, you know, house our souls in, so it's good to take care of them. You know, that's one of the reasons why I quit smoking back in October. It's, you know, one of the reasons why I'm eating healthy today and exercising and doing all this stuff is because I want to, you know, grow in all areas of my lives. And then the last thing it says is the steps will give me deep spiritual qualities. So doing this process, working this process is going to help us grow in all these areas of our life. All right? So it's not just about what we do in a 12-step meeting. It's about, you know, how we carry ourselves in every area, outside and within. Okay? So that is the end of the first forward. Now we're moving on to the forward to the second edition. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. It says, since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination, which is true. I moved to Bali, and there's AA there. It's everywhere. There's NA. There's all kinds of A. It says, already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5 of us have sprung up in other communities. Yay, little chia pets. Okay, so 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 alcoholics. We're going to highlight that. Basically, that's just reiterating that this works. Again, if it didn't work, it would not be spreading all over the world, right? And I also want to say that in 16 years, it's gone from 100 alcoholics to 150,000, right? And there was like 3 meetings in the beginning. So it says groups are already found in each of the United States and all the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are now just taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Augury, that means something that indicates the future, in case you people were wondering what that word meant, because I didn't know. Alrighty, moving on. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio, June of 1935, during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. Okay, Bill Wilson, stockbroker. Dr. Bob, physician. Now, was Bill Wilson really a stockbroker? Hell no. He was more like a stock assessor, right? So basically what he did was he traveled up and down the eastern seaboard, visited different factories, and basically took reports on if the machines were upkept, if the factories were clean, how the workers were taken care of, and basically fed that information to stockbrokers who bought and sold stocks based on that information, right? But saying that he's a stockbroker sounds good, right? There's some pride there. There's some dishonest pride. So it's cool to acknowledge that, right? Because one of the founding fathers, who of course has been deified by some people for some crazy reason, is nothing more than a human with defects of character, just like everybody else, right? Slide this book right over. So it's important to understand that, because a lot of us come into the rooms of a 12-step meeting and we hear speakers share about how they got clean or they got sober and they got honest, and we hold ourselves accountable to that standard. And when we don't get honest, or we're not what we think is perfect, or if we have some time under our belt and we think that we should be this healthy because blah, 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 we drive ourselves insane. So have some patience with ourselves. We're exactly where we're at when we're supposed to be there. So don't trip. Dr. Bob, he was an ass doctor, so he studied assholes, which is apropos because, 12 steps are filled with them. So anyway, 6 months earlier, the broker, Bill, had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience. Okay, cool. Spiritual experience. Check out what a spiritual experience is so we know the exact definition, right? Sorry, I'm a slow page turner, bear with me. Page 567, spiritual experience. We're going to make it real simple. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself in many different forms. The personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. That is a spiritual experience. A personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. Now, for me, there's a difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is that revelation, right? Boom, that idea hits you, right? But the spiritual experience is the practical application of that revelation to our life. It's the experience in life that we have as a result of that revelation. Now, knowing Bill Wilson a little bit about his story, did he really have a sudden spiritual experience? I think he had a sudden spiritual awakening, right? Which was, oh my God, there might be something bigger than me. And he was motivated to do something different. But based on knowing that he was also searching for other ways to find spiritual experiences, which meant that his spiritual awakening wasn't quite holding, and he was the kind of guy who was begging for a drink on his deathbed and filled with resentment and fear and stuff like that in his sobriety, it leads me to believe that, it was more of a series of awakenings rather than a continual spiritual experience. And I want to let you know that it's possible to have a continual spiritual experience, but it's based on you maintaining your relationship with that power, right? Which of course is going to be based on how many people and how much time you devote to taking people through this book and being a blessing in every experience that you have, right? So we're going to highlight from the spark that was to flare into the first group all the way to experience on the next page, right over here. And we're going to underline, of course, sudden spiritual experience. So it says he had this sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend. And we're going to underline and highlight the word friend. So this friend, his name was Ebby Thatcher. I wrote that in my book. Thacher. I thought there was an extra T in there, but there's not. And Ebby Thatcher had 2 months sober. So basically the story of Ebby is this, right? He was a dude, he was an alcoholic, and his family was pretty well-to-do, even political. And someone in his family, I'm not going to get into all the details because we don't have too much time, was running for some office. And Ebby's drunken antics were not a good look for the family, right? So they're like, yo, you need to get out of here, go to the summer house in Vermont, sober up, fix it up, do whatever you got to do, but just get out of town until the election is over so that we don't look bad, right? So Ebby's like, cool, I'm out. So he goes to the summer house in Vermont, and he does exactly what his family says, all right? He's got 8 months to be up there, and he starts getting to work. He sobers up. He starts redoing the floorboards, repainting the house, redoing the windowsills, re-roofing, tiling, all that stuff, right? And he does a bang-up job. Ebby is killing the game, okay? But he finishes in 4 months, and there's another 4 months left. But of course, as a good alcoholic would want to do, he wants to celebrate, right? So he goes out, gets some alcohol, and he starts celebrating. Now, of course, he's got the physical allergy because he's an alcoholic, so he loses a bit of control. And in some sort of blackout, amazing state, he's sitting outside and looking at the house, and he's congratulating himself. He's patting himself on the back. He's so happy. And he sees some birds pecking at the paint that he just painted. And he's like, what? No! So he runs in the house and grabs his shotgun, and he starts shooting holes in the side of his house trying to hit these birds, right? Some neighbors driving by, they just see some crazy, insane drunk dude blowing holes in the side of his house. They're like, oh no, hell no, we don't want that. So he gets arrested, right? He gets taken in front of the judge. Now the judge knows Ebby, the judge knows his family, he knows, their stature in the community. He's like, oh man, I don't want to throw you in prison or asylum for the rest of your life, but I don't know what else to do with you. And Ebby's bummed, right? But these 3 dudes show up. One of them's Roland Hazard, who makes an appearance in the book later on. Another one's Shep Cornell, and another one is Seaber Graves. And they show up, and they're like, yo, we're from the Oxford groups. Here we come to save the day. And we think we have a program that will help this dude get sober. So why don't you release him to us? And the judge is like, okay. So Ebby gets released to the Oxford groups. And then it's going to say who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. We're going to underline and highlight Oxford groups. So the Oxford group was a Christian group. And basically, they modeled a design for living based off the original teachings of Christ. All right? So that's where Ebby wound up showing up. So they get Ebby sober, right? And part of their program for him was to help somebody else. Now, we're talking about 2 months sober when he showed up at Bill's spot, right? So did Ebby have a working knowledge of the 12 steps? No, because the 12 steps didn't exist, right? But Ebby was thrown into service immediately because people knew that serving others is what gives us the power. So anyone who's telling you that you are not ready to be of service is out of their mind. Don't listen to them. You're ready to help other people. If you can just pass on even the pages of this book, Like, let's say we go through 3 pages one day and you spend the next week taking people through those pages. That's all you need to know. You will not fuck up their life, because at the center of your message will be this book. This book will not mess up their life, okay? I'm not saying go out and be their life coach. I'm not saying go out and be their therapist, or, help them with their relationship problems if you've got 2 days of sobriety. But I am saying is that if you want to train your mind to be more sane, and if you want to gain access to the power of the universe, and if you want to stay sober, do what you got, right? You got 3 pages, pass on 3 pages. So, boom. He was in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. It says Bill, or he, had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William Duncan Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now counted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. Woo, it's a long sentence. We're going to underline Dr. William Duncan Silkworth, is New York specialist in alcoholism, all the way down to pages. So, as we discussed earlier before, the order of this book is written for a specific reason. It was modeled after Bill Wilson's 12-step experience. But also every word in this book is written for a specific reason, right? And it was scrutinized by a bunch of alcoholics because it was a collective conscience of 100 people that had recovered from alcoholism. I actually have a copy of the manuscript of the big book so you can see all the notes that everyone took. It's amazing, right? So, if every word in this book is written for a specific reason, then them calling Dr. Silkworth a medical saint is a big deal. Why would they call him a medical saint? Well, I'm going to tell you. Dr. Silkworth coined the disease concept of alcoholism, right? Now, he's not the first person in the world, in the universe, in time who ever said that alcoholism was a disease. They talk about alcoholism being a sickness in the Bible, right? This is old news. But he's the first person that ever said you cannot teach an alcoholic or a drug addict how to moderate their drinking or using, okay? Because we have a physical allergy, and we have a brain that lies to us and tells us that we don't have this physical allergy, and only a spiritual solution will help us, right? So that's what was different. You had doctors out in the world trying to teach us how to moderate, how to drink and use responsibly, or tell us that it's a moral issue, or it's a, oh my God, you gotta, get to the root of your trauma and then it'll be fixed, and all kinds of stuff. In fact, that all sounds familiar. I think we've got that going on in the world right now. But the doctor is basically saying you're an alcoholic because you're an alcoholic. What defines you as an alcoholic is you have a physical allergy. There ain't shit you can do about it. It's never gonna go away, so don't try to drink moderately. You might die, right? So, next to that, I have written summer of 1933. So Bill Wilson learned about that in the summer of 1933. But like I discussed earlier, he didn't get sober until December 11th of 1934. So the lesson in that is that self-knowledge avails us nothing, right? We need 3 things in order to sustain sobriety. Part of it is a full knowledge of our condition. Yes, that's one thing. The second is a spiritual solution. The spiritual solution is developing a relationship with God, universe, higher power, whatever you want to call that thing. And the third thing is a program of action designed to get us there, right? Blessing others, brotherly and harmonious, or sisterly and harmonious action, right? So, it says, from this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. We're going to underline that sentence and circle grave nature. Basically what that means is that it kills us. I've been around long enough to see a bunch of my friends die. It says, though Bill could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, tenets are principles, he was convinced of the need of moral inventory. So we need a 4th step, confession of personality defects, 5, 6, and 7, restitution of those harmed, 8 and 9, helpfulness to others, 12, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, which is steps 2, 3, 11. We're going to circle necessity. We're going to underline from this doctor all the way down to God, and we're going to highlight that whole area there, right? So that's basically where and what steps Bill, thought were necessary for us. Now it says necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. Now, they kind of got soft in us in the end of the book where it says this book is meant to be suggestive only because they were trying to be diplomatic. But necessity is not a suggestive word. And they're going to say other words in this book that are not suggestive. Must, had to, have to, need to. Those are not suggestive, right? So we need to believe in and depend upon God. Now, for those people who are still hating God in this very moment, or who cannot or think that they cannot believe or depend upon God because A, it just doesn't seem real, or B, it's something that they're still attaching old conception to, that's cool. Just chill. It'll get there. If you work with other people and if you help people, you will feel some power. I promise you. And it will motivate you to continue on that process, right? So we need to believe in and depend upon God. We're going to move on. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So we're going to underline and highlight hard. We're going to underline and highlight many alcoholics. And we're going to underline and highlight only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So he worked hard, right? This shit ain't easy. We go the extra mile, you know? We take phone calls in the middle of the night. We basically set aside our personal agenda to work with other people. We drive to places to go work with other people. So it's no joke. We work hard. And we work with many alcoholics, right? I work with as many people as I possibly can. Now, because this process is not to make me depend on a sponsor, and this process is not to make my sponsees depend on me, what they do is not my business, right? Like what they do with this, whether they're actually doing it, blah, 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 it doesn't really matter to me. If they continue to show up and fill that slot of time in my life where I can show up for them, then I'm getting what I need out of this thing. Now that may sound totally selfish and fucked up, but the reality is that I'm in this process to feel good, to enjoy my life, to be present, to be in the moment, right? And I know that by blessing other people, that's the way I do it. So I dedicate as much time as I possibly can to doing this work. There was a time in my life where I actually had no job, and I remember I would book people from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. at my house. So every hour a person was coming over to my house, and I would just smash out the day working with, 10 people. So that's how I got practice at this. The more people that you work with, the more proficient you'll get at carrying the message, the more comfortable it will be for you, the easier it will be for you, and the more you're going to shift out of living selfishly. And what we're going to find out later on is that selfishness and self-centeredness, that's the root of our problem. So the only thing to basically solve our problem is contrary to selfishness, which is selflessness. All right? Boom. So it says you worked hard with many alcoholics. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care if you're a man. I don't care if you've got time, if you don't have time. I don't care if you have more time than me. It just says many alcoholics. I work with as many people as I possibly can. On the theory that only an alcoholic can help an alcoholic, right? So the way that we can talk to each other is different than the way that, someone who is a non-alcoholic can reach into the heart of an alcoholic, right? Or a drug addict. We have experience. Part of being an alcoholic or a drug addict is our great line of defense in life is you don't understand me, you don't get me, I can't do what you say, right? But with us, we do understand each other. We've been to those places, we've dug those holes, and we got the t-shirt. So here we are. It says, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. Now this is important. So Bill, 6 months. He's in it, right? He's going hard. He went back to the hospital. He talked to Dr. Silkworth. He's like, yo, Silky Silk, what's up? Silky's like, what's up? He's like, yo, can I come in and help people? Silky's like, okay. So he's going to the hospital. He's working with people. He's stopping off at bars. He's wrestling dudes off of bar stools. He's trying to help people. He's telling everybody, you got to find Jesus. You got to help people, blah, blah, blah. You got to find God. And nobody's getting sober, right? Nobody. And he comes to his wife after 6 months of working his ass off because, Bill burned all of his bridges when he was out there being a drunk, so no one wants to hire him, so he's got nothing but time on his hands. And he's like, Lois, Lois, what's going on in my life? I'm trying to help all these people and nobody's getting it. And she's like, yeah, but at least you're staying sober. And boom, light goes off in Bill's head. He's like, oh shit, I'm staying sober. So by working with as many people as I possibly can, I stay sober. That's our guarantee in life, right? If we work with as many people as we possibly can, we stay sober. But then Lois said something real smart. She's like, why don't you go talk to Dr. Silkworth and find out, maybe he's got a suggestion. So he does. He goes back to the hospital again. Yo, what's up, Silky Silk? Yo, what's up, Bill? He's like, so, I've been working with all these people. Nobody's getting it. What is the deal? And Silk's like, yeah, man, I've been seeing what you're doing. And honestly, I think you're out your goddamn mind. You're going around to all these alcoholics and you're trying to talk to them about God. And you're trying to talk to them about Jesus and spiritual experience and blah, blah, blah. He's like, did you want to hear about any of that? Bill's like, hell no, I didn't. Dr. Silkworth is like, why don't you talk to them about alcoholism? Bill's like, oh, snap. Okay. So, it says a broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. So to put this in perspective, right, what I said earlier was that Bill had burned all of his bridges, okay? He had not worked up until this point for about 5 years. Now, he came from a place of all of his self-worth coming from his job and his money, right? He thought he was the man. So basically, he was completely stripped of his manhood and then fucking gone deeper, just of total self-loathing, self-hatred. I am nothing, because his wife is working, 12-hour shifts at a department store. His in-laws are sick. She's coming home, finding him drunk on the couch. He's stealing from her purse in order to pay off the delicatessens. To get more alcohol. I mean, he's a mess and he feels like complete shit about himself, right? So here, he's sober and he's dedicated his life to helping other people, but finally he gets a job opportunity. He's like, finally, yes, God loves me. All this work with other people is paying off, right? And this job opportunity is in another town. So he's not near Dr. Silkworth, he's not near the hospital, he's not near his stomping grounds or his a little support group, and he's in Akron, Ohio, right? And this job thing follows through. So if you could only imagine how bummed Bill must have been, and not just bummed, but just like a complete strip test of faith, where it's just like, you know what, F you, God, I've been doing all this work for you, and you're not doing shit for me. Like, what is the point of me dedicating all my time to all these people who don't even want this, and you can't even get me a job? Like, that's where he's at. How many of you guys have felt like that in sobriety, where it's like you're doing a bunch of stuff for people and you can't even get yours, right? So that's where he was at. It was hard. But then it says he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, thank you, Lois, he must, circle must, not suggestive, carry his message to another alcoholic. Must. So in order to save himself, he must carry the message to another alcoholic. It doesn't say he must call his sponsor and fucking whine and complain to his sponsor. It says he must carry the message to another alcoholic. That is how we save ourselves. That is the tool. I'm going to give you guys a life example. I DJ for NASCAR, right? NASCAR put a bunch of money in my account basically for the year, for my flights, for my fee, for my everything, right? And I was about to DJ a club. My NASCAR trip is the next week. I'm totally irresponsible and haven't booked my tickets yet. I check my bank account before I DJ the club, and I see that my bank account in America has zero money in it, okay? And I'm thinking, uh-oh. So I DJ the club. I try to stay present for that, and I get outside of the club. I'm in Bali at this moment, and I make a phone call, and I find out that the IRS is taking the money, right? And I drive home. Now, I drive a motorcycle, so that keeps me pretty present. I get to my house, and thank God I'd set up a session with someone. It's 4 a.m. in Bali, but the person that I set up a session with is, in America. So I set up a book session and I go through the book, right? Now, going through that process of the book, it reminded me about faith. It reminded me about always being taken care of. It totally took away the fear of what am I going to do? How am I going to handle the situation? It totally took away the I'm angry at myself, what am I, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? So by the time I got off with my hour-and-a-half session with this person in the book and doing this process, I was in a completely different mental state. So, I was able to call the IRS. I found out that it was something that I missed in 2012 or whatever. It's not a big deal. And they actually were really kind. And they wound up like reimbursing me the money so I can go make the trip and, do blah, blah, blah. Now, that is how this works, right? I do the work, I stay in working with others, and I just watch my life fall into place, get better. And I don't have to do that much, right? If I'm in a place of fear, I work with another alcoholic and it takes me out of that fear. If I'm in a place of anger, I work with an alcoholic and it takes me out of that anger. I just use this as my solution because every time that I'm in the book, I'm re-brainwashing myself with a message of positivity, of faith, of light, and I'm getting to be of service, so I'm connecting to the power of God. So, it says he realized that in order to save himself, he must carry the message to another alcoholic. So what happened was Bill started calling the Oxford groups in Akron, Ohio, and he wound up reaching this lady named Henrietta Siderling, who was way deep in the Oxford groups, way deep into prayer, meditation, and spirituality and all that stuff. And she knew Ann, Bob's wife. And she knew Bob too, but she was good friends with Ann. And so she calls up Ann, and she's like, there's this guy in town who can help Bob with his alcoholism. Can they meet? And Ann said, well, I would absolutely love that, but right now Bob's passed out underneath the table. Can we do this tomorrow, maybe at your spot? And Henrietta is like, cool. So she talks to Bill. She's like, let's do it tomorrow in the morning. So they go and they meet at Henrietta's spot. Now, first, Bob fucking comes to. He wakes up in the morning. Ann's like, yo, there's this dude in town. He's going to help you with your alcoholism. And Bob's like, well, that's nice, but I'm not talking to him. And she's like, yeah, you are. He's like, no, I'm not. Yeah, you are. No, I'm not. Yeah, you are. No, I'm not. But she's a wife. She wins. So Bob shows up. He's like, I'm going to give this dude 15 minutes. That's it. So what winds up happening is that 15 minutes turns into 3 weeks, right? Bill just wound up staying there. And Bob's impression of Bill was this. His first impression. I've never met anybody who so eloquently described the disease of alcoholism as Bill Wilson. So what that means is that Bill Wilson followed Dr. Silkworth's direction and described the disease of alcoholism, right? And that's how we got into Bob's, right? So, next to must, I want you to write not a suggestion again. So it says this physician, they're talking about Bob, had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. So like I said, Henrietta was involved with the Oxford group Deep, which means that Ann was, which means that Bob was too, right? So Bob had already been introduced to the spiritual solution. So what that means is that we can have a spiritual solution, and we can even have a program of action, but if we don't have a full knowledge of our condition, then that's a piece that's missing, right? So what Bill really brought to the table was the full knowledge of our condition and how to describe that. What Bob really brought to the table was a spiritual solution and the program of action, right? So it says, this physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker, Bill, gave Bob Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. So we're going to underline and highlight all that from the physician all the way down to muster. What is the spiritual remedy for our malady? Working with others. Service. Boom. So he chased that, okay, with a willingness he'd never before been able to muster because he knew why he needed to do it now. Okay, it all made sense. That's why I did it too. The result of that is he's sober, never to drink again up until the moment of his death, okay? So it says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. And we're going to highlight from he sobered never to drink again to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. We're going to underline strenuous work. We're going to underline one alcoholic with another. We're going to underline vital, triple underline vital. We're going to triple underline permanent, and we're going to underline recovery. We're going to highlight strenuous work. One alcoholic was vital to permanent recovery. Above strenuous work, we're going to write going out the way. That means that we go out of our way to work with other alcoholics, right? So if your person that you're working with, lives 45 minutes or an hour and a half away, you drive there. That means that if you're at home chilling with your partner watching that Netflix and someone calls, just pick up the phone, see what's up. That means that if you'd rather be, playing video games and eating cheesy poofs and you've got a session of someone coming over, like you do that session, you do that book session. Same for me, like that time with the IRS, that story. It's like there's a part of me in my old me that would want to just sit in my feelings and feel like a piece of shit and sit in self-pity and blah, blah, blah. But I know from doing this enough that working with another human being is going to help me, right? So it was easy for me to pick up that phone call from Celeste and do the book work and blah, 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 because I know that this works. But before that, this was my basic instinct. Like I definitely would want to, try to manage the problem and fix everything and, probably create more problems. So strenuous work basically means setting aside our personal agenda to work with as many people as we possibly can, going out of our way to do so. One alcoholic with another, that's who we're working with, was vital. Vital means necessary. We have to do it to permanent recovery. Okay? Now, one day at a time. Sounds fantastic. I mean, even that's broad. Really, all we have is one moment at a time. But this book is promising me permanent recovery if I work as hard as I possibly can with as many people as I possibly can. Now, even though I only have this moment, I definitely don't want to go back to feeling and living the way that I lived and felt before, right? So if this book is guaranteeing me permanent recovery and all I need to do is some strenuous work when alcoholic with another, then I'm down for that. So that will conclude today's session. Thanks for joining. Love you all.